Okay, this tutorial is going to help you answer the conflicts section of the number 4 map skills class task. Okay, so this video is specifically dealing with these particular skills, and you're going to need 3 maps to do this. You may have already stuck these into your jotter. There is a Balmahar map which you will have used as part of your explaining the suitability of your land use and the first part of this task. And there are also a renewable energy map and an industry conflict map. Now, before we get to looking at what you need to write under each map, make sure you have each of these as a title above each map, although you obviously won't have the map itself for the Balmahar map because that one is already in your jotter at an early place. But use each of these as a title in your jotter before writing your answer. Then what you want to do is you want to get your map in front of you and you want to look for 2 land uses or two pieces of evidence on your map and then explain why they might be in conflict with each other. Now, you're going to be using your knowledge about conflicts to answer this question. And the only thing you then need to add is some evidence that shows that conflict is going to be happening. And that would require you giving 6-figure grid references from the map. You identify the land uses, you explain the conflict, okay? And you're going to make multiple points rather than just 1 point. So you're going to be looking to make 3 or 4 or 5 possible conflicts on each of the 3 areas, okay? So what I would suggest you do first of all is pause the video now, make sure you've got your Balmahar map in front of you, that you've got that title at the top of a page where you're going to write your answer, and then watch the next bit of the video as I talk you through the Balmahar map, and we have a little think about the different bits of evidence that you would use from the Balmahar map to explain this. And by the way, you should get this map. It's in the main classroom and you can open it up. Each of the 3 maps you need are here in the actual assignment. Okay, right, so I'm assuming you've got your page set up with conflicts between tourism and farmers. Let's have a little look at this map. Now, if we think about farming conflicts, probably a really obvious bit of evidence that you're going to want to talk a little bit about is a farm. Find a farm on your map, like this one up here, Cashel FM, that's the symbol for a farm. This is a good one to pick because around it there are a number of possible conflicts that you could easily draw attention to. And give the 6-figure grid reference. So you could start your answer with, at Cashel Farm, there could be a conflict with tourism, or at Cashel Farm, at 400939, there could be a conflict with tourism. And the first bit of evidence you could do is the fact there's a campsite nearby. So you could say the first conflict could be with a campsite at, and that would be 945,930. So it's right up at the top. What you then want to say is, what could the conflicts with people camping nearby be? So these campers could be cutting down trees in the area, which could damage the farmer's land because they might be having fires. These campers could be making lots of noise late into the evening that might disrupt the farmer's animals. So you could say that this land here, you could identify it, that might be used for animal grazing. You might say, so the land at 946,938 could have farmers' animals in it, and the campsite could disrupt those animals, potentially damage them. You might also say the conflict could work the other way. The farmer might have tractors on this narrow road that might create traffic congestion. You might also say that campers might leave cars over his gateways and driveways, blocking him from getting in and out of his fields, which might also create a conflict. Okay. You could talk about this footpath. These little diamonds on the map is actually a footpath, but let's just jump to another part of the map. Here we've got a hill with a path going through it. Now it's likely that this is going to be used for sheep farming. So this farmer at Cashel Farm, or possibly this farm here, I don't know if it's a farm, but it's probably a farm. It's probably Ochmar Farm, is possibly going to had sheep farm. So you could say in grid square 4392 is likely to be sheep farming. The conflict with tourists could be that walkers walking on the footpath, and then you could give the grid reference of the footpath at 43, 5, 92, 7 might have their dogs off the leash that could harm, potentially kill the sheep. You might also say if the farmer has gateways across his land, then people walking on this path might leave the gates open, and that would allow animals to escape. Okay, right. So what I would do now is, if you have been listening to me, you might want to now play this back and write up your answer. Okay, so think about the conflicts that tourists might have with the farmers. Those conflicts might also be, you might talk about the forestry area. So people might be going into the forest and cutting trees down. You could identify the forest area. You could talk about the visitor car park being overwhelmed with cars on a nice Saturday at this visitor centre, which could create a problem for the residents of Bal Mahar. Of course, they might be farmers, so that would be another potential conflict. This viewpoint might attract lots of visitors to come and see the view, but they might drop lots of litter, which might create a conflict with local people because it's ruining the environment. Okay, so the key is whenever you pick your evidence, give a six-figure grid reference to explain the pit on the map that you would want me to look at, and then explain what the conflict would be. Okay, now write up your answer. Make sure your answer has got a very minimum of 4 conflicts happening between this particular thing that we're looking at, farming and tourism. Have grid references to back up all your points. And when you're ready, move on to the next conflict. Okay, so you've written up your first conflict. We're now going to look at your second conflict. So check that you have written down conflict with renewable tourism. Okay. You will have this map already in your jotter because we will have looked at it when we were looking at the suitability for land uses. But we're now dealing with what's the possible conflict. So let's just have a little look at this possible conflict. Let's pull up the map that you will have been looking at that refers to this. Right. Now, when you were thinking about the suitability of the landscape, you will have thought about the fact that it's high mountains, therefore it's going to be very windy. Wind farms that are on the top of mountains don't get obstructed by other mountains, so they'll pick up the wind from all directions. You'll talk about the wet, high levels of rainfall in the mountains that allow you to collect water, and also because you've got the geography of U-shaped valleys, you can build dams easily across narrow areas and trap the water. So that will be the kind of map evidence you'll have given for why this is a suitable landscape. Also, it's quite remote. So what would you be saying about the conflict? Well, let's talk about the 2 different particular land uses we can see here. Okay, and the first one is the fact that we've got a dam. Okay, a dam has been built here that's created this reservoir. How do I know it's a dam? Because it's got a flat front to it. And that would never be a natural kind of loch shape if it was just naturally formed. But if we build a structure like a dam, and we can see the little embankment symbol that indicates we've got a dam here. So we've got at least water storage, and it could possibly be a hydroelectric power. So what's the conflict? Well, first of all, the building of a dam in a landscape for water storage to create reservoirs or to create hydroelectric power alters the look of the landscape, which can make tourists unhappy because it looks ugly. Second possible conflict is we can see we've got walking footpaths, so we could identify on our map, 6-figure grid reference. You'll want to do the same for the dam. You'll want to identify where the dam is. You would have said that people walking in this area, and give an example of the footpath, would be potentially their pathway might be obstructed if a reservoir was built, because you can't now walk across here, you've got to go around it. It also, they have to then put up with a landscape that's been changed, so it looks less attractive, so there might be unhappiness amongst people who are walking in this environment. Another possible conflict you refer to is this reservoir now covers almost 2 kilometers of land that's now been flooded. So the land has been lost. That might affect environmentalists, because there could have been wildlife using that land, and it might also have affected farmers who might have had sheep grazing on that land. So these are all conflicts you can refer to. Once again, notice as I read the answer to you, I'm giving you lots of map evidence. My answer is always including information from the map, like the reservoir covers 2 kilometers. Or if I was on a footpath here, I could give a good reference. I couldn't walk directly to the south because the reservoir's across it. Let's have a look at the wind farms. Now, you might not see wind farms on a map, but you could say that if they were to build a wind farm, if you on a map, and you could give a location maybe of a mountaintop like this, you could then talk about the conflicts with people walking on the paths. So it's very similar to the conflicts with the reservoirs. People don't find these attractive. Environmental groups could be upset with the potential danger of the wind farms affecting bird life in the landscape. Okay. Um, So, though that is the kind of, you've got 3 or 4 key points you could make about possible conflicts that would exist between different possible land users. In this case, you've got your tourists, your walkers, your hikers, but you've also got your environmentalists and you've got your farmers who might be in conflict with power companies who build these wind farms or who build these dams, water companies that build these dams to create reservoirs. Okay, so now if you haven't written this up, read back and write out what the conflicts are. Make sure your answer includes some grid references and some evidence from the map. And we'll move on to the third and final conflict. Okay, what you want to do now is, this is a new map that you won't have included up here. We haven't looked at industry as one of the land uses suitability. But we are going to look at it as a conflict. We're going to look at 2 possible conflicts. So first thing I'd like you to do is make sure you write, or if you've not done so already, make sure you've got the title Conflicts Between Industry and Tourism Farmers, and make sure you've got the industry conflict map actually stuck into your jotter, and it should be titled Industry Conflict. What you then want to do is let's consider the possible conflicts. So our final map, we can see the town of Blair Athol, and we've got 2 possible conflicts we can discuss. So I'm going to start with the conflict of the quarry. So the first thing you want to do is give the 6-figure grid reference of the quarry. Now, what could the conflict be? There's a whole range of conflicts. First of all, a quarry is a big hole in the ground where they've dug out rock for various things like road building and house building. Now, that's obviously scarring the landscape. It's making the landscape look less attractive, which is going to potentially conflict with the golfers here on the golf course or the campers staying in the campsite. It might affect people wanting to stay there because there's a large unattractive quarry. Now, if you're going to talk about the golf course or the campsite, give a 6-figure grid reference for those particular locations, and then explain why the conflict might happen. You might also say that large mining trucks could be in conflict with road users who are coming to visit the area because they might be driving down the road, blocking up the road, large, slow-moving vehicles for tourists that are using this road. So you would want to name the road the A9 and then talk about what the conflict could be. Because this is a quarry, there's going to be blasting. So you might say that the residents of Blair Athol and give the grid reference. You might just give the 4-figure grid reference for Blair Athol, for example, 8765. That's its 4-figure grid reference. The residents who live in Blair Athol could be put off by the large blasting coming from the quarry. You can identify this long-distance footpath here. That's the green dots. Walkers walking across this landscape might be less inclined to come and walking in this area because of the unsightly quarry, which might then affect the business at the hotel. You could give the 6-figure grid reference for the hotel and explain why there would be less visitors at the hotel or even the campsite because of the quarry. Okay, so there is a number of other ways quarry could create dust during the blasting, which might affect farmers' fields. So you could say if there was a farmer in the area, maybe down here in this little area of land, you could give the 6-figure reference for here with some crops growing down there on that flat land. Then the dust from the quarry might affect his crops and they might not grow as well. That could be another possible conflict you could talk about. Right, let's pick a second thing on the map, which is also an industry. I'm going to look down here at the forestry industry. So you could identify Allen Forest in grid square 8561. So what could the conflicts be? Well, first of all, the reason there's a conflict with forestry, with, for example, tourism, is this is a commercial forest. I can tell because of the straight lines. It's a plantation full of conifers. So what's the conflict? Well, first of all, these forests tend to be really quite dark and the trees are quite packed together. So they're not easy to navigate through. They're also quite unattractive often on the side of hillsides because they're not often native forests. This can also affect the animals that live in these forests. So you get non-native creatures like the grey squirrel, for example, thrives in these forests. whereas, of course, the natural squirrel for Scotland is the red squirrel. So this forestry industry is creating an unnatural environment, which is allowing non-native animals to thrive, which will affect the biodiversity of the area. So that might upset environmentalists. Okay. Also, if they're cutting these trees down, as they will be doing frequently, this might affect walkers walking on the paths. It might create a lot more danger. Large trucks coming up this little road, the BA109, to collect those logs when they're cutting them down, might have a difficulty navigating these narrow roads, especially this narrow road here. So you could identify this narrow road on your map, and that might then affect local residents because these large forestry operations and vehicles can't easily get up these roads. You could also talk about the continual cutting of forests, creating a large amount of noise, which might affect, and then just find something on the map that might affect. So, for example, we've got a farm here, or we've got what looks like a hotel here, which is nearby and therefore likely to be affected. Okay, so that's your final answer. Read through all three answers. Check you have described the conflict, as in who are the two people who might be in conflict. Have you explained? And for each of the three conflicts we looked at, you should have at least 4 points where each point was explained and had some map evidence that showed you'd read the map and given that map to clearly explain what the conflict is. Okay? And that's you completed. And if you're done with that, you can possibly go back to any of the 3 maps and add more points. There is a lot of other possible conflicts, things that could happen between land users on any of the 3 maps that we haven't talked about, but could be explained using map evidence.